Hello and welcome to Scroll Spoiler Season. Now, this video I attempted to bring out a while back, but there was a problem with the video software and they wouldn't render more than 3 minutes of the thing, so I rage quit that software, bought some new stuff, and now I'm bringing the video to you, and hopefully it'll all go well or I'll cry a bit. Now, we've had some new things added to the test server that aren't available to the wild yet. I've got some good footage of it, so I want to make the most of it. And I'm gonna just discuss my thoughts and opinions on the new stuff, as well as give you some footage of it so that you can see what they're like in action. This video will be better than the previous video because I've got a bit more experience with the scrolls now. Immediately after the last video, I played a few games as a friend and learned a whole load of new stuff, and while the video was failing me, I decided to do a live stream and I learned a few things there too. Let's start off with Stagheart. This is a 2-cost growth enchantment, which is actually quite powerful. Its ability is that enchanted unit gains +1 attack and +1 health for each Stagheart in play. Now that has been changed, the wording's been changed to now say that you control. That was because when it said in play, it implied that if your opponent played a Stagheart, all your creatures would gain the buff of his Stagheart too. That is not the case, and so they've had to change the wording, so don't be confused if you see that on old images of the scroll, which will be in the video, sadly. It's a pretty powerful enchantment because when you first play it, it's just a 1/1 light buff. It's not super huge, but it's enough to make a difference in that now a Ragged Wolf can take out a Royal Spearman, which is quite important to get rid of those spiky units. But then when you add another one on, that 2/3 Ragged Wolf becomes a 4/3 Ragged Wolf, and if you cast the Stagheart on that Ragged Wolf, it gains the buff from both, so it gains +4/+4. So you can see how playing all three of these on one creature will give it +9/+9. Or you can have a group of creatures that are separate with +3/+3 on each of them. Now be careful, because if one of yours is on 1 HP and has a Stagheart on it, and someone removes the Stagheart from it, it will die. The health from the enchantment is lost second. Its actual health is lost first. So the moment the enchantment goes, it loses that buff and it dies. Which kind of makes sense when you think about it. It sort of doesn't. You'd expect the enchantment damage to be lost first, but the way it works is when Stagheart leaves the battlefield, reduce health by X, and that will kill it. So we have to. That's how that will work. So just be aware of that when you have some really low cost. Not low cost. When you have some low health creatures with Stagheart, they might die if one of the other creatures with Stagheart dies. So be careful. I have had that happen, and it will be in the background in this video. Yay! It wasn't fun. The AI did it to me. It's mean. As for whether I can see this getting some competitive play, possibly. I think he'll be the thing that replaces your Leeching Rings and your Druid Burial Grounds, in that you want to make your creatures powerful enough to deal with spiky and still have a decent amount of health. So if you run Leeching Rings or Druid Burial Grounds, it's going to be a toss-up between this and that. Or if you play Bearpaw, this is the enchantment that will probably replace that quite easily, because you get less of a buff, but you don't get the countdown reduction, and the buff can become more powerful with time. So I think it's a fairly reasonable scroll. I think it will see some competitive play, maybe in the more aggressive than the defensive growth decks. Next up is Crone, 3 growth, human kinfolk. She has 0 attack, 3 countdown, 2 health, and Crone does not attack. When Crone is destroyed in melee combat, the attacking unit is destroyed. Basically, she's a proxy mine in growth, and that's alright. It allows us to negate the charging in kinfolk veterans coming from nowhere, but she's fragile enough that she can be dealt with quite easily, especially by energy players. And the fact that it has to be melee combat. Basically, it's the way you approach spiky units in order from energy is the exact same way you're going to approach her, so she shouldn't be a huge problem for you. Energy players. Order players, I think this is specifically a hate card for you. We don't want you relentlessly charging straight through all our units, so we're going to put Crone at the front. And because it's a 3-drop growth, most people are going to play it because we're looking for something to put there anyway. So I expect to see her get played quite a lot. I think maybe when we get a different 3 growth creature, we might swap her out for that, because I don't know if Spiky really suits a growth deck. I think I'd rather have something much more aggressive, but it's the best I can get, so I'm gonna definitely take it. That's my opinion on Crone. I think we were a bit fooled when we originally thought that it would have something to do with Gravelocks. That was KB's fault. Everyone go blame KB if you were excited for Gravelock stuff. Next up, we're going to move on to the energy scrolls. We're going to start with the Automata Forge. 3 energy, structure, forge, 0 attack, 3 countdown, and 5 health. Instead of attacking, Automata Forge summons a gun automaton. I always say it wrong, and someone pointed that out at the end of the last video, so I'll say every single variation. Automata Forge summons a gun automaton on an adjacent tile. Pay 3 energy to decrease countdown by 1. This ability can be used any number of times per turn. So this is actually surprisingly powerful. I didn't expect it to be, but the reason why is because it's really slow. You play it on turn 3, it takes 3 turns to tick down, therefore turn 6, because you're going to be playing stuff most turns anyway. So on turn 6 it creates its first gun automaton, which then takes until turn 8 before it attacks, but after playing with it a bit more, I've realised that I think it's designed to come down on like turn 10. Like when you hit a point where you're top decking and you're just hitting sacrifice at the start of every turn, you'll draw something, sacrifice it for scrolls immediately, and then play that. An Automata Forge can be vital during that time, because you sacrifice for scrolls and you get the forge. You put down the forge and you still have excess energy. You spend it on speeding up the Automata Forge. Next turn, you sacrifice the scrolls, you play what you can, and you still have excess energy. You can churn out a huge amount of gun automatons, especially if you use Potion of Resistance and Overdrive on it. You can get 5 from it, 1 every single turn until it burns out, which is quite powerful. I have discovered. Even on turn, if you have both of them in hand on turn 3, go for it. Play it on turn 3. Play the Overdrive on turn 4 and just churn out a load, and it's so aggressive to see. Like, as a growth player, when I see that many things pop out suddenly, I do scream a little bit inside. It's quite foreboding when you see the combo happen. Otherwise, it's just a 5-cost wall that won't do anything until the late game. But in the late game, it could actually stand out. In my original video, I had huge doubts about this scroll, but playing with it recently, I've completely changed my mind, and I feel like it could be a powerhouse. And I now understand why it's rare. Next up in energy is the one that everyone's going to freak out about. It's Metal Wonder. It costs 4 energy. It is a structure. The subtype is Totem. 0 attack, dash countdown, and 4 health. When an opponent plays a spell or enchantment, Metal Wonder deals 2 damage to a random opponent's idol. So this is going to be pretty powerful. It's going to be a good way for energy to just sit there and say, nah, you ain't casting your stupid amount of spells, go draw. I don't think it'll do a huge amount against growth, because other than God Hand and Crimson Bull and Rallying, there aren't a huge number of spells and enchantments in that deck. We're mostly just going to be throwing creatures at you until we deal with Metal Wonder. And to be honest, even then, it might just be worth casting God Hand, taking the 2 damage and just accepting it, because it's random. It can be absolutely vital to give the energy player a small enough target that they can deal enough damage really easily to it to kill it and win the game. Or it could just hit a really full health idol that's well defended and actually accomplish nothing. Even if you have all 3 and you're dealing 6 damage, that is quite powerful, but people are just going to conserve their spells, cast 1 that allows them to clear out most, if not all, of your wonders, and then go nuts. So it's going to take a fairly specific deck for this to become a win condition, where you've got the Decimations, the Faith's Chains, you've got the Metal Wonders, and your goal is to kill them using those 3 main scrolls and allow them to choose to kill themselves if they have to cast spells, which every deck will eventually have to do. You can't avoid it forever. Even if it's just a cheeky Fertile Soil that you just want to cast, get out of the way, and then start putting down creatures, that could be 6 potential damage, and could make a huge difference in the game, because it just speeds up that Decimation kill. There have been decks that win using just Decimation, and this speeds that up a little bit. So it's worth considering, but I don't think it's a standout scroll as people seem to think it is. I'm sure its go draw denying potential will certainly make it sought after, because go draw has been one of those things that people have not been enjoying playing against recently, and this is a good way to deal with that, because they can cast 25 spells and they die. Well, no, 22 spells and they die if you have one of these out. So it is powerful, but it's not powerful in every circumstance, just really against the go draw decks, which is where I expect to see it the most played. In a multi-resource deck, it could work, but I think there aren't quite enough ways to control the board in order and energy beyond countdown, increase, and direct damage, that things would just get out of hand quite easily, and you'd lose your wonders before you were ready to truly commit to that victory with them. Next up, we're moving on to Order. We're going on to Faith's Duty. It is a 2-cost Order enchantment. Text says, enchant unit you control at the beginning of each of its turns. Enchanted unit is dealt 1 damage, and opponent units on that row get their countdown increased by 1. So what happens is one of your creatures takes a small punch, and all of your opponent's countdowns on the same row are increased at the start of the next turn. My problem with this scroll is that it's very easy to play around the moment you see it happen. You see it come down on your opponent's unit, and then you move your guys to the side. He attacks. Maybe it's a good way to allow you access to an idol that you want to kill, just by getting people to move out of the way, because if they stay there, they'll take the countdown increase. But unless you're at a point where you've taken out 2 idols and you just need this last one, I don't see it being a huge thing. Maybe against a lot of structure decks where they're unable to just step out the way, it could be worthwhile. But put this on like a Night Scholar and it can sit there taking that damage and increasing countdown for days. Your opponent's stuff stuck on that row just won't attack. Problem is there's not a huge amount of reason for them to stay unless it is to defend a very close to death idol, in which case you've won anyway. Yeah, I'd much rather draw a speed than a Faith's Duty in order to win that particular game, so I don't know if I'd personally, not as an Order player, I play Growth, but I have played Order in the past, and I don't know what I'd take out of that deck to put in Faith's Duty, just so that I can increase the countdown of a few creature units. The art is phenomenal. I have to say that. But as a scroll, I think it's really a cool idea. It adds to that Frostwind Thought Trap countdown increase bracket, but I don't think it's going to see much competitive play, if any. I think maybe when we get a limited format, it could see some use in that, because structure decks are a bit more common in limited formats, and maybe it'll be a clutch enough scroll that especially with the reduced amount of speed in a limited format, it could work out being useful then. But even then, I don't see it being a huge play. It's a very nice scroll, but I don't personally find it competitive. Next is Wings Shield. This is a 3-cost Order creature that is the subtype of human. It has 2 attack, 2 countdown, and 3 health. Wings Shield has Armor X, where X is the number of units behind it. Combat damage dealt to Wings Shield is decreased by X, and the flavor text is "Hold the line." Now, the art on this one is also beautiful. It's got one of my favourite colours just splattered all over it. It's very, very cool. Especially if you see the in-game thing, which I'm going to show in the background, of it attacking. That's just so awesome, because it's just so nice. As for whether I think its ability is good, I feel like in the very early game, when you're fighting off a Kinfolk Brave, it's really good, because Kinfolk Brave does no damage to it if it's got 2 units behind it. If you get a Royal Infantryman behind it, it gains a health buff. If you get a Ducal Infantryman behind it, it gains an attack buff. So it can do a lot of damage in the early game and deny quite a fair bit of Growth's aggression. But in the long term, I think that Waking Stones is a better option, unless you're going for a very aggressive order deck, where the point is you deny their early attacks and then build up your force and win before they get a chance to build up theirs. Maybe then it could work out, but don't forget Quake's a thing, that's a big board reset, and if you don't have a long-term strategy and you get quaked out, there's not a huge amount really that you can do to recover from that using a wing shield. It just hits the board and dies to anything with relentless, a fair amount of attack. I mean, Crimson Bull completely negates the armor effect and it just runs through. So towards the late game, I don't see this as a huge play. I think Waking Stones will still probably win out because it reduces all damage to 1. It takes 3 hits no matter what, and nothing can really charge through it to a huge amount. Waking Stone is a solid wall that it stops any attack. Like, you can God Hand 3 creatures into that thing and it will die and nothing behind it will. It's a very, very powerful scroll, and I don't see Wing's Shield being powerful enough to replace it. Maybe it could go alongside it in a very defensive order deck, maybe with some Night Scholars as well, so that you defend a lot of weaker creatures, maybe with crossbowmen and stuff like that. Maybe it would fit in there where it's got a space replacing a spearman or something. But to be honest, I personally would prefer a spearman as opposed to a shield. I'd much rather be dealing damage to my attackers as opposed to just slowing down the attack a little bit. I think it's a really nice idea. I think it will certainly see some competitive play. Maybe if we start building a little bit more of an aggressive order deck than the one we currently have, which relies on building up the board and then punching really hard for the win, is what the order deck currently does. Anything that gets played gets countered by a pushback or a speed that kills it. That's a very reactive order deck. Maybe we could get one that's a bit more proactive and deals the damage first and sets the agenda for the match. That's probably where Wing Shield will come in. But I do think it'll have to either be alongside Waking Stone, or Waking Stones will probably end up being better than it in the long run. So don't forget that because these are still on the testing server, they could be subject to change before they are released. I don't know if I think they will be. I think they're quite good as they are, but they might be changed. So if they come out slightly different, then there was a good reason for it. If you have differing thoughts and opinions on the things that I said, feel free to leave them in the comments, or you could just come to my house and shout them in my face. I mean, it feels about the same. Just throw your opinions in the comment section so that I can see what you think, because sometimes, especially with... Which video was it? I think it was the one where I was discussing Dust Runner. There was something in the comment section saying like, oh, you said this, but that's not actually the case. And I was like, damn, you're right, that isn't right. So, I mean, you spot things because sometimes I miss things, and so if you see anything that you think is different to what I said, just drop it in the comment section and I'll read it and I'll probably reply, because I'm a lonely person with not enough to do. That was a really whiny outro. I didn't expect it to be that depressing. Okay, I'm just gonna go now. I'll speak to you in the next video, which will probably contain some news regarding my YouTube channel. And then after that, I think we'll just get back into the normal scrollsy stuff. See you then.